concerned about rely on the presumption of service and the weakening of the current service provisions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair. Oh.
I call the Honourable Member Chris Farfoe. Te alofa koutou.
Taloha ni, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to Part 1 of the Courts and Criminal Matters Bill. I understand that Part 1 amends the District Court Act of 1947, and the substantial provisions in this part basically change the way that attachment orders around the deduction of fines from salaries and benefits can be processed by the courts. My understanding of the current situation is that it needs both the creditor and the debtor to have an assessment of the situation as to whether or not the debtor can pay the bill or pay the fine. But the substantial provision in this bill basically changes that so that the creditor can ask for an assessment to be done by the court as to whether or not the debtor is able to pay that. And as many speakers on this side of the House have said before, we support this because it will streamline the process for those who are expecting some money, especially those in the civil debt arena, to know whether or not they can actually be paid. This bill also will address the huge problem that we do have with unpaid fines, and it is a big problem. I believe in the year from July 2008 to June 2009, there was around $800 million of unpaid fines here in New Zealand, and that the Courts Department had to write off around $90 million of that. So this will hopefully go in some way to address that problem by streamlining the process, by making sure that those who have transgressed and have been asked to pay a fine will fulfil their obligations as asked by the court, and to pay their fine as soon as they possibly can, and to assess whether or not, if they are not able to pay their fine, then we know soon enough so there isn't the level of frustration with those who are owed money by the courts. And I guess that would be a very frustrating position to be in if you were expecting some money from an individual or an organisation that was fined for any transgression, to have to go through this process that could be strung out through previously the process where we had to have both parties there to get an attachment order, but this, Mr. Chair, would streamline that process to make sure that a proper assessment is done of the ability for someone who has been fined to pay the bill. There are, while Labor does support this bill, this part of the bill, there are some omissions that I think my colleague Jacinda Ardern alluded to earlier on that we thought could have been included in this part, and that one of those was around a single agency being able to be responsible for the responsibility for fines. We understand that at the moment there are around 80 plus issuing authorities of fines, and we believe that with a problem of the scale of in the region of $800 million in that period that I spoke about earlier, that if we did have one unitary body that was looking at being responsible for fines, we might do a better job of collecting most of those unpaid fines. As I said, there are 80 plus issuing authorities that have responsibility for fines, and we believe on this side of the House that while we support what is in this bill, that it could have gone a little bit further in terms of making sure there was a much more streamlined process for collection of those fines. As Jacinda Ardern also alluded to earlier on in this debate as well, there is a problem with young people in terms of a level of fines that they are starting to receive where it becomes impossible for them to start addressing it or begin addressing it. It's around $2,000, and you can imagine at the moment how difficult it is for these young people to do the basics like pay their rent and pay the bills or even get a job at the moment, that if they were to be stung with with fines in the region of $2,000, just how difficult that would be a mountain to climb to make sure that they could pay off that debt. And I'm pretty sure that any of those young people who face that kind of debt with the courts would like a much more streamlined process, or at least to have some way of there being an assessment as to whether or not they could pay it. Because if we're talking about around a level of $2,000 for young ones at the moment, I think most of them would struggle to be able to pay off that level of debt. So I think this in some way goes a long way to make sure that there is a process there for them, that if they do owe money to the courts, that there is now a much more streamlined process, so that is not strung out for them, that is not a burden that is carried for them for a long period of time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.